The courtroom was dead silent as 6-year-old Mia walked in, her small fingers gripping the leash of Max, a retired police dog with a scar running down his shoulder. Every eye followed her as she moved toward the witness stand, her steps slow but steady. The air felt heavy, like the whole case rested on her tiny shoulders. At the defense table, Daniel Carter sat calmly, his lawyer whispering in his ear. He was accused of kidnapping, but there was no solid proof, just a traumatized girl who hadn't spoken since the incident. The prosecutor had hoped Mia would finally speak today, but she just clutched Max's leash tighter, her lips pressed together. Then, something unexpected happened. As Mia sat down, her fingers twitched in a small, quick motion. A secret signal. Max's ears shot up, his body tensing like a coiled spring. A low growl rumbled from his throat as his eyes locked onto Carter. The judge, a sharp-eyed man named Harold Bennett, noticed it immediately. He slammed his gavel. "This court will take a recess," he announced, his voice firm. Something was wrong, very wrong. The moment Judge Bennett called for a recess, the courtroom erupted into murmurs. Reporters scribbled notes, jurors exchanged confused glances, and Daniel Carter's smug expression faltered for just a second, his fingers twitching against the table. Mia didn't move from the witness stand, her small frame almost disappearing behind the wooden railing, but Max stayed rigid beside her, his unblinking stare fixed on Carter like a predator sensing danger. Prosecutor Lisa Grant quickly approached the bench, her voice low but urgent. "Your Honor, we need to discuss this in chambers, immediately." Bennett gave a sharp nod and motioned for the bailiff to clear the room. As the crowd shuffled out, Carter's lawyer, Mark Reynolds, grabbed his client's arm and hissed something under his breath. But Carter just shook his head, his eyes darting between Max and Mia like he was piecing together a puzzle he didn't want to solve. Outside in the hallway, Mia's mother, Sarah, knelt beside her daughter, her hands trembling as she smoothed Mia's hair. "Sweetheart, what happened in there?" she whispered. Mia didn't answer. She hadn't spoken a word since the night Carter tried to take her, but her grip on Max's leash tightened. Detective Jack Harris, a grizzled investigator with decades of experience, watched the scene closely. He had worked child abduction cases before, and something about Max's reaction set off alarms in his mind. "That dog didn't just growl at random," he muttered to Lisa. "He recognized Carter, but from where?" Lisa's eyes widened as a chilling thought hit her. What if Max has seen him before? What if Carter's done this before? Meanwhile, in the defense's private room, Carter's calm facade finally cracked. He paced like a caged animal, his breath coming too fast. "That damned dog," he spat. "He knows." Reynolds frowned. "Knows what?" Carter didn't answer, but the sweat on his forehead said enough. Back in the judge's chambers, Bennett leaned over his desk, his voice grave. "Lisa, I want every case file you have on Carter, especially any involving dogs." Lisa hesitated. "There's one thing we haven't checked yet. Max was a K-9 officer before he retired. What if he and Carter crossed paths during an old investigation?" Bennett's gaze darkened. Then, this just got a whole lot bigger. As the recess neared its end, Harris made a call to the K-9 unit. "I need records of every suspect Max ever tracked, especially ones that got away." The officer on the other end paused. "There was one case, a kidnapping 3 years ago. Max cornered the guy, but he escaped. The suspect was never identified, just a sketch based on witness descriptions." Harris's pulse spiked. "Send me that sketch, now." When the image flashed on his phone, his blood ran cold. The face was younger, the hair different, but the eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, were unmistakable. It was Daniel Carter. Back in the courtroom, as the bailiff called for order, Lisa approached the bench with a file in hand. "Your Honor, we have new evidence." Carter's lawyer shot up. "Objection! This is a blatant attempt to—" Bennett cut him off. "Overruled. Proceed, Miss Grant." Lisa's voice was steady, but her hands shook slightly as she placed the sketch on the table. "This is from an unsolved abduction 3 years ago. The suspect was described as luring children with promises of puppies, just like Mia's case. And the K-9 officer who chased him," she paused, letting the weight of her words sink in, "was Max." The room exploded into chaos. Carter's chair screeched as he stood, his face draining of color. Mia, still silent, reached down and buried her fingers in Max's fur, her tiny signal. Max's growl deepened, his muscles coiled, ready to act. Bennett's gavel cracked like thunder. "Order! Mr. Carter, you will sit down." But Carter wasn't listening. His gaze darted to the exit, then back to Max, and in that moment everyone in the room saw the truth. He wasn't just scared of the law. He was scared of the dog who remembered him. The courtroom buzzed with tension as the sketch of the unidentified kidnapper circulated among the jurors, each pair of eyes flickering between the paper and Daniel Carter's now pale face. Max hadn't moved an inch from Mia's side, his body still tense, his low growl a constant warning that filled the silent gaps between the gasps and murmurs. Carter's lawyer, Mark Reynolds, scrambled to regain control, slamming his hands on the table as he shouted objections, but Judge Bennett's sharp glare silenced him instantly. "This evidence is admissible," Bennett declared, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "The jury will consider the connection between this sketch and the defendant." Carter's fingers dug into the edge of the table, his knuckles white, his breathing shallow. He wasn't just a man fighting charges anymore. He was a cornered animal, and everyone could see it. Detective Harris wasted no time. While the courtroom erupted into arguments, he slipped out and made a call to his team. "I need a full background sweep on Carter, every address, every job, every property under his name, especially from 3 years ago." His mind raced. If Carter had taken children before, there had to be more. More victims, more hiding spots, more evidence buried somewhere. Meanwhile, Mia's mother, Sarah, clutched her daughter tighter, her heart pounding as she watched the scene unfold. She had always known Carter was dangerous, but seeing the fear in his eyes now, the way he couldn't even look at Max, sent a fresh wave of terror through her. Mia, still silent, pressed her face into Sarah's side, her small fingers gripping her mother's sleeve like she was afraid Carter might vanish if she let go. Back in the courtroom, Lisa Grant seized the moment. "Your Honor, given this new development, we request a temporary recess to further investigate the connection between the defendant and this prior case." Reynolds immediately objected, his face red with frustration. "This is a fishing expedition. There's no proof that Sketch is my client." But Bennett had already made up his mind. "Request granted. Court is adjourned until tomorrow morning." As the gavel struck, Carter shot up from his seat, his voice hoarse as he hissed something to Reynolds. The lawyer's expression darkened, but he nodded, quickly ushering Carter out of the room before the press could swarm them. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions, cameras flashing as Carter pushed through the crowd, his head down, his steps hurried. But Max's reaction had already set the media ablaze. Headlines would scream about the K-9 who remembered a killer by morning. Harris watched from the steps, his jaw set. He knew they were close. If Carter had a history, there had to be a trail. And if there was a trail, Max might be the only one who could lead them to the truth. That night, Harris dug through old case files, his office littered with photos and reports. The abduction from 3 years ago had gone cold. No body, no witnesses, just a missing child and a sketch based on a terrified neighbor's description. But now, with Carter in the picture, everything fit. The method was the same: luring kids with promises of puppies, striking in broad daylight, vanishing without a trace. Harris's phone buzzed, a message from the forensic team. Soil samples from Carter's van match a rural area near the old mill. There's an abandoned cabin out there, worth checking. Harris's pulse spiked. If Carter had taken Mia, he would have had a plan. A place to hide her, a place he'd used before. At the same time, Sarah sat on the edge of Mia's bed, watching her daughter sleep. Max curled protectively at her feet. The dog hadn't relaxed since the courtroom, his ears still perked, his body alert even in rest. Sarah gently stroked Mia's hair, her mind swirling with fear and hope. Tomorrow, the trial would resume. Tomorrow, they might finally get answers. But for now, all she could do was pray that Max's instincts and the justice system wouldn't fail them. The pre-dawn light cast long shadows across the abandoned cabin as Detective Harris's unmarked car rolled to a stop, tires crunching over gravel. He'd come alone, unwilling to risk tipping off Carter or his lawyer about this lead. The cabin itself was weathered, its wooden planks warped with age, the front porch sagging under years of neglect. But the fresh tire tracks in the mud told a different story. Someone had been here recently. Harris clicked on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom as he approached, his gun drawn but held low. The air smelled of damp earth and something faintly metallic, a scent that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Max, who had insisted on coming along, strained against his leash, his nose twitching, his body rigid with anticipation. The dog hadn't stopped staring at the cabin since they'd arrived, as if he could already sense what waited inside. The front door was unlocked, the hinges groaning as Harris pushed it open. The interior was sparse. A dust-covered table, a single chair overturned, empty food wrappers scattered near a cold fireplace. But it was the basement door that caught his attention. Unlike the rest of the cabin, the handle was clean, free of dust, as though it had been used recently. Max let out a low whine, his claws clicking against the floorboards as he pulled Harris toward it. The detective's pulse pounded in his ears as he reached for the handle, bracing himself for what he might find. The stairs creaked under his weight as he descended, the beam of his flashlight revealing a sight that turned his blood to ice. The basement walls were lined with newspaper clippings, dozens of them, all detailing missing children cases spanning years. In the center of the room stood a small cot, its sheets stained and rumpled, a single teddy bear lying abandoned on the pillow. But what made Harris's breath catch was the far wall, where a series of shallow scratches marred the wood, each set marked with dates. Tally marks. Counting days. Max suddenly lunged forward, his nose pressed to the ground near the cot, his growl guttural and insistent. Harris knelt, shining his light where the dog indicated, and saw it. A small, faded hair ribbon, its color barely recognizable after years of dust. But the pattern was unmistakable. Tiny daisies, just like the one in the photo of Emily Walsh, the first girl who'd gone missing 3 years ago. Harris's radio crackled to life, the dispatcher's voice breaking through the heavy silence. "Detective, we've got a problem. Carter's lawyer just filed for an emergency motion to dismiss, claims the sketch is inadmissible. Judge Bennett's reviewing it now." Harris cursed under his breath. They were running out of time. He snapped photos of the basement, his hands steady despite the rage simmering beneath his skin. This was Carter's trophy room, his collection. And if they didn't act fast, he'd walk away from it all. Back at the courthouse, The morning sun streamed through the windows as Lisa Grant paced outside Judge Bennett's chambers, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She'd just seen Harris's photos, and the horror of them hadn't fully sunk in yet. Carter wasn't just a kidnapper, he was a predator who'd been operating for years, and Mia had been his next target. The chamber door opened, and Bennett emerged, his expression unreadable. "I've denied the motion to dismiss," he said quietly. "But we've got another issue. Carter's lawyer is pushing for bail, citing lack of concrete evidence tying him to the old cases." Lisa's stomach dropped. "Your Honor, with all due respect, that basement—" "Isn't enough," Bennett interrupted. "Not without physical proof Carter was there. We need something irrefutable." Across town, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she hadn't touched. Mia was coloring quietly beside her, the crayons moving in slow, deliberate strokes across the page. Max lay at her feet, his head resting on his paws, but his eyes were alert, watching the door as if expecting danger. Sarah's phone buzzed, a text from Harris. "We found something. Stay strong. Trial's not over yet." She exhaled shakily, her fingers brushing Mia's hair. They were so close, but Carter was fighting back harder than ever. In the courthouse parking lot, Carter leaned against his lawyer's car, his face half hidden in shadow. "This is getting out of hand," he muttered. "That dog, he's the problem." Reynolds adjusted his tie, his voice low. "We stick to the plan. Without direct evidence, they can't—" "You don't understand," Carter interrupted. His voice edged with something close to panic. "That dog remembers. And if they find the others—" He trailed off, his gaze darting to the courthouse doors. For the first time since the trial began, he looked afraid. Really afraid. Meanwhile, Harris stood in the evidence room, staring at the ribbon from the cabin. There had to be a way to link it to Carter. Then it hit him, the soil samples. If they could prove the dirt in Carter's van matched the cabin's location, combined with Max's reaction in the sketch, it might be enough. He grabbed his phone and dialed the lab. "I need those soil results yesterday." As the sun climbed higher, the pieces of the puzzle began to shift. The trial would resume in an hour, and this time, Harris was determined to make sure Carter didn't walk away. The courtroom hummed with nervous energy as the bailiff called for order, the shuffling of feet and rustling of papers filling the air while the jury took their seats. Daniel Carter sat stiffly at the defense table, his fingers drumming a rapid, uneven rhythm against the wood, his eyes darting between the judge and the prosecution team. Across the room, Mia clung to Max's leash, her small body pressed into her mother's side, her wide eyes fixed on Carter with a mix of fear and something else, recognition. Max stood alert beside her, his ears pricked forward, his muscles coiled tight beneath his fur, as if ready to spring at the slightest provocation. Detective Harris stood near the prosecutor's table, his jaw set, the photos from the cabin burning a hole in his pocket. They had one shot at this. One chance to prove Carter wasn't just a suspect. He was a monster who had been hiding in plain sight for years. Judge Bennett's gavel cracked against the bench, silencing the murmurs. "Prosecution, you may proceed." Lisa Grant rose smoothly, her heels clicking against the floor as she approached the jury box. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what you're about to see will change everything you think you know about this case." She turned to Harris, who handed her a large envelope. Inside were the photos from the cabin, the newspaper clippings, the tally marks, the hair ribbon. As she passed them to the jury, one by one, the room seemed to hold its breath. A juror gasped, another covered her mouth, their faces paling as the reality of what they were seeing sank in. Carter's lawyer, Reynolds, was on his feet in an instant. Objection! This is highly prejudicial. There's no proof my client had any connection to this place. But Lisa was ready. Your Honor, if you allow me, we have a witness who can provide that connection. Bennett's eyebrows rose. Proceed. Lisa nodded to the bailiff, who opened the side door. A woman stepped in. Frail, her hair streaked with gray, her hands trembling as she clutched a faded photograph. Harris had tracked her down just that morning. Mrs. Eleanor Walsh, Emily Walsh's mother, the first victim. The moment she saw Carter, her breath hitched, her knees buckling slightly before she steadied herself. "That's him," she whispered, her voice breaking. "That's the man who took my Emily." The courtroom erupted. Carter's chair screeched as he shot up, his face twisting in fury. "This is insane! I've never seen this woman before in my life." But Max reacted instantly, his growl ripping through the chaos, his body straining toward Carter with such intensity that Mia had to grip his leash with both hands. The dog's reaction was undeniable, a visceral, instinctive response to the man he'd chased 3 years ago. Judge Bennett's voice cut through the noise. "Order! Mr. Carter, sit down." He turned to Mrs. Walsh. "Ma'am, are you certain?" She didn't hesitate. I'd never forget his eyes, and neither would that dog. Lisa seized the moment. "Your Honor, we also have forensic evidence linking Mr. Carter to the cabin." She motioned to a lab technician waiting in the gallery, who stepped forward with a report. Soil samples taken from the defendant's van match the unique mineral composition found at the cabin's location. This isn't coincidence. This is proof. Reynolds spluttered, scrambling for an argument, but the damage was done. The jury's faces had hardened, their earlier uncertainty replaced by something colder, something like disgust. Then, the unthinkable happened. Carter lunged, not toward the witness, not toward the judge, but toward Mia. His hand snaked out, grabbing her arm, yanking her forward with a snarl. "You little brat, this is all your fault." The sentence died in his throat as Max moved faster than anyone could react. With a snarl that echoed off the courtroom walls, the dog launched himself at Carter, knocking him to the ground, his teeth bared inches from the man's throat. The bailiffs surged forward, but Harris held up a hand. Max wasn't attacking. He was holding, waiting, his eyes locked onto Carter's, his message clear. Try it. Just try it. Chaos erupted. Bailiffs pulled Carter away, cuffing him as he shouted obscenities. His mask of calm shattered into 1,000 pieces. Mia, shaken but unharmed, buried her face in Max's fur, her small shoulders trembling. Judge Bennett's voice boomed over the noise. "Daniel Carter, in light of today's revelations and your actions in this courtroom, your bail is revoked. This trial will adjourn for the day, but make no mistake, justice will be served." As the bailiffs dragged Carter away, he locked eyes with Harris, his voice a venomous whisper. "You think you've won? You have no idea what's coming." Harris didn't flinch. "Yeah, I do. A lifetime in a cell." But as he watched Carter disappear through the doors, a chill ran down his spine. The cabin had revealed Carter's past. But what if there was more? What if they'd only scratched the surface? Outside the courthouse, the press swarmed, cameras flashing as reporters shouted questions. Harris ignored them, his phone buzzing with a new message from the lab. The ribbon from the cabin, they'd found DNA, not just Emily Walsh's. Others, more names, more victims. He looked down at Max, who sat protectively beside Mia, his gaze steady. They weren't done yet, not even close. The police station was alive with a frenzied energy that night. Detectives and forensic analysts moving like shadows under the fluorescent lights, their voices hushed but urgent as they pieced together the nightmare Daniel Carter had left behind. Detective Harris sat at his desk, the weight of the day pressing down on his shoulders as he stared at the lab report in front of him. The DNA from the ribbon had matched not just Emily Walsh, but 2 other missing children. Jake Peterson, who vanished 4 years ago near a playground, and Lila Nguyen, taken just last year from her backyard. The dates aligned with the tally marks in the cabin, each scratch on the wall representing another child Carter had stolen. Harris rubbed his temples, his mind racing. They had Carter in custody, but the horror of what he'd done was far from over. There were families out there still waiting for answers, still clinging to the hope that their children might come home. And then there was Mia, the one who got away, the one who might hold the key to unlocking the rest of Carter's secrets. Across town, Sarah watched Mia sleep, the girls, chest rising and falling in the quiet rhythm of dreams. Max lay at the foot of the bed, his ears twitching at every distant sound, his body a protective barrier between Mia and the world outside. Sarah's fingers trembled as she scrolled through the news on her phone. Headlines screaming about Carter's arrest, the cabin, the growing list of victims. But one detail gnawed at her. The reporters kept calling Mia the lucky one. Lucky. As if surviving Carter was a matter of chance, and not because of Max's intervention that day in the yard. She clenched her jaw, her gaze drifting to the window, where the moon cast long shadows across the lawn. Carter had chosen Mia for a reason, and if he'd taken others there had to be a pattern, a method, something that connected them all. Back at the station, Harris's phone buzzed, a call from the evidence room. "You need to see this," the tech said, her voice tight with tension. Harris was on his feet in an instant, his coffee forgotten. The evidence room was cluttered, boxes and files stacked haphazardly, but the tech led him to a table where a single item lay under a bright light. A small, leather-bound journal recovered from Carter's apartment during the search. Harris flipped it open, his stomach turning as he scanned the pages. Not just notes, drawings, sketches of children, each labeled with a date, a location, even preferences. Carter had documented them like a collector cataloging prized possessions. But one page near the end made Harris's blood run cold. A list of names, some crossed out, others circled. Mia's name was there, but it wasn't crossed out. It was underlined, and beside it, a single chilling word, pending. Harris's hands shook as he reached for his radio. "I need units to Mia Carter's house, now." He didn't wait for a response before sprinting to his car, his tires screeching as he peeled out of the parking lot. Carter was in custody, but the journal suggested something worse. He wasn't working alone. There was someone else, and Mia was still a target. At the house, Sarah jumped at the sudden pounding on the door, her heart in her throat as she peered through the peephole. Harris's face was grim, his eyes wild with urgency. "Sarah, open up. It's not over." She yanked the door open, her pulse roaring in her ears as Harris stepped inside, his voice low. "We found something in Carter's things, a journal." "He wasn't acting alone, Sarah. There's someone else, and they're still out there." Sarah's hands flew to her mouth, her legs buckling as the reality of his words hit her. Max, sensing the shift in the room, rose from his spot by Mia's bed, his growls a quiet rumble of warning. Harris pulled out his phone, showing her a photo of the journal page. "Do you recognize any of these names, any of these places?" Sarah's eyes scanned the list, her breath catching on one entry, a park near their old neighborhood, dated just a week before Carter tried to take Mia. "We used to go there," she whispered. Before we moved, Mia loved the swings." Harris's jaw tightened. "It wasn't random, Sarah. He was watching her, and if he had a partner, they might still be watching." Outside, a twig snapped. Max's head whipped toward the window, his body rigid, his teeth bared in a silent snarl. Harris's hand went to his gun, his eyes locking onto Sarah's. "Get Mia, now." Sarah didn't hesitate, darting down the hall to her daughter's room just as the porch light flickered, once, twice, before going out entirely. The house plunged into darkness. The only sound the frantic thud of Sarah's heartbeat and Max's growl, deep and unrelenting, as something, or someone, moved in the shadows beyond the window. The darkness in the house was suffocating, pressing in from all sides as Sarah clutched Mia to her chest, the little girl's sleepy whimper muffled against her shoulder. Max stood like a sentinel in front of them, his body a tense barrier between the family and whatever lurked outside, his growl so low it vibrated through the floorboards. Detective Harris had his back pressed to the wall beside the window, his gun drawn but held close, his breath steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. The porch light wasn't the only thing that had gone out. The street lights were dark too, the entire block swallowed by an unnatural blackout. Too convenient to be a coincidence. Too timed to be anything but a threat. Harris's mind raced. Carter was in custody, but his journal had hinted at a partner. And if that partner was here now, they weren't just watching. They were making their move. A creak from the porch made them all freeze. Then another, slow, deliberate footsteps, circling the house like a predator sizing up prey. Max's ears flattened, his focus locked on the front door, his muscles coiled to spring. Harris held up a hand, signaling Sarah to stay put as he edged toward the hallway, his phone clutched in his other hand. Backup was on the way, but they were minutes out. Minutes they might not have. The footsteps paused outside the living room window, the faintest shadow visible through the curtains. Then, a tap. Light, almost playful. A finger against the glass. Sarah's breath hitched, her arms tightening around Mia, who had gone eerily still, her small fingers digging into her mother's shirt. Max's growl escalated into a snarl, his teeth bared, the fur along his spine standing on end. Harris made a decision. He couldn't wait. He lunged for the front door, yanking it open, his gun sweeping the porch, but there was no one there. Just the empty swing swaying slightly in the wind, the gate to the backyard hanging open. Then, from the side of the house, a rustle. Max didn't hesitate. He tore past Harris, a streak of fur and fury, his barks shattering the night as he chased the sound. "Max, no!" Sarah cried. But it was too late. The dog disappeared into the shadows, his barking growing fainter as he pursued the intruder. Harris cursed, torn between going after Max and staying to protect Sarah and Mia. Then the choice was made for him. A crash from the backyard, the sound of a trash can toppling, followed by a yelp that was unmistakably Max's. Sarah didn't think. She shoved Mia into Harris's arms, her voice a desperate whisper. "Take her. Hide her." Then she was running, grabbing the fireplace poker on her way, her bare feet slapping against the cold floor as she burst out the back door. Harris's shout followed her, but she didn't stop. Max had saved Mia once. She wouldn't let him pay for it now. The backyard was a maze of shadows, the moon offering little light as Sarah stumbled forward, the poker raised like a weapon. "Max?" she called, her voice shaking. A whimper answered her, from the far corner near the old oak tree. She sprinted toward it, her heart in her throat, and found Max on his side, a dark stain spreading across his fur. A knife lay nearby, glinting in the dim light. Someone had hurt him. Someone was still here. Then a hand clamped over her mouth from behind, yanking her against a solid chest. "You should have stayed inside," a voice hissed in her ear, hot and rancid with breath that smelled of cigarettes and something metallic. Sarah thrashed, elbowing backward, but the grip only tightened. The intruder, a man, tall and wiry, his face obscured by a hood, dragged her toward the gate, his free hand reaching for something in his pocket. A syringe. Sarah's vision swam with panic. This was how they'd taken the others. This was how they'd planned to take Mia. A gunshot cracked through the night. The man jerked, his grip loosening just enough for Sarah to wrench free. Harris stood at the back door, Mia shielded behind him, his gun trained on the intruder. "Freeze! Police!" The man hesitated, his eyes darting between Harris and the fence. Then, with a snarl, he bolted, vaulting over the gate and disappearing into the alley beyond. Harris didn't chase him. He rushed to Sarah's side, his hands checking for injuries. "Are you okay? Did he hurt you?" Sarah shook her head, her attention already on Max, who was struggling to rise, his breathing labored but his eyes alert. "We need to get him to a vet, now." As Harris radioed for backup, his voice tight with urgency, Sarah crouched beside Max, her hands trembling as she pressed them to his wound. The dog licked her wrist weakly, his tail giving a single thump against the ground. He'd protected them again, even hurt, even bleeding, he'd tried. Mia wriggled free from Harris's grip and threw her small arms around Max's neck, her face buried in his fur. And then, for the first time since the trial began, she spoke. "Don't go," she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Please, Max, don't go." The sound of her daughter's voice shattered something in Sarah. She looked up at Harris, her eyes blazing with a fury that mirrored his own. "They won't stop, not until they have her." Harris's jaw clenched as he holstered his gun. "Then we stop them first." The sterile white walls of the emergency veterinary clinic hummed under fluorescent lights as Sarah paced the waiting room, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, her nails digging crescent moons into her palms. Every tick of the clock above the reception desk felt like an eternity. Each second stretching into an unbearable silence, punctuated only by the occasional murmur of the staff and the distant whine of an animal in pain. Mia sat curled in a plastic chair, her knees drawn to her chest, her small fingers clutching the torn edge of the blanket they'd wrapped Max in before rushing him here. The blanket was stained with his blood, dark, rust-colored streaks that stood out against the pale fabric like accusations. Harris stood near the door, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice a low, urgent growl as he coordinated with the police units scouring the neighborhood for the intruder. The syringe had been recovered near the fence, its contents still unknown, but the implications were clear. This wasn't just an attack, it was an attempted abduction. And the man who'd fled into the night wasn't just some random accomplice. He was a predator, just like Carter, maybe worse. The door to the treatment area swung open, and a woman in scrubs stepped out, her face lined with exhaustion but her eyes kind. Sarah lunged forward before the vet could speak, her voice cracking. "Is he—" The vet held up a hand. "Max is stable. The knife missed his major organs, but he lost a lot of blood. We've stitched him up and started a transfusion. He's a fighter." Sarah's legs nearly gave out beneath her, the relief so sudden and overwhelming that she had to brace herself against the wall. Mia slid off the chair and darted toward the vet, her tiny hands balled into fists. "Can I see him?" The vet hesitated, then nodded. "For a little while, but he needs rest." The moment they stepped into the treatment room, the sharp scent of antiseptic and copper hit Sarah like a physical blow. Max lay on his side on a padded table, his fur shaved around the bandages that wrapped his torso, his breathing shallow but steady. Mia didn't hesitate. She scrambled onto a stool beside him and pressed her forehead to his, her whisper so quiet Sarah barely caught it. "You saved us." Max's tail thumped weakly against the table, his tongue flicking out to graze her cheek. Sarah's throat tightened. This dog had given everything for her daughter, twice now, and she had no idea how to repay that. Harris appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "Sarah, a word?" She followed him into the hall, her stomach knotting at the look in his eyes. "We found something," he said, keeping his voice low so Mia wouldn't hear. "The syringe. It was loaded with a sedative strong enough to knock out a grown man in seconds, and the lab matched the fingerprints on it to a guy named Darren Cole. Ex-military, dishonorable discharge, suspected in at least 2 child disappearances in neighboring states but never charged. No direct ties to Carter on paper, but..." He pulled out his phone and showed her a photo, a grainy surveillance still of Cole and Carter together at a gas station, dated months before Mia's abduction attempt. They were laughing. Sarah's vision swam. "They were working together," she breathed. Harris nodded. "And Cole's not done. We found his car abandoned a few blocks from your house. Trunk was full of supplies, ropes, duct tape, even a small cage. He was planning to take her tonight, Sarah, and he might try again." Sarah's hands shook. She thought of the journal, of the word pending next to Mia's name. This wasn't over. It would never be over until Cole was caught or dead. She met Harris's gaze, her voice steel. "What do we do?" Harris exhaled. "We set a trap, but it means using Mia as bait." Sarah recoiled. "Number absolutely not." Harris held up a hand. "Not like that. We'll have her under constant surveillance with Max and a team of officers hidden nearby. Cole's obsessed. He won't be able to resist coming for her, especially now that he knows Max is hurt. And when he does, we'll be waiting." Sarah opened her mouth to argue, but a sound from the treatment room cut her off. Mia's voice, soft but clear. "Mommy?" Sarah turned to see her daughter standing in the doorway, Max's leash clutched in her small hands. The dog himself was struggling to sit up, his ears pricked forward despite his injuries. His gaze locked onto Sarah with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. Mia's next words were barely a whisper, but they hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. "He says we have to go home." Sarah blinked. "What?" Mia stepped closer, her fingers tangling in Sarah's sleeve. "Max told me. The bad man is going to the blue house, the one with the swing. He's going right now." Harris went very still. "The blue house with the swing. That's the Wilsons. They've got a 6-year-old daughter." Sarah's blood ran cold. Cole wasn't coming back for Mia tonight. He was moving on to the next name on the list. Max let out a sharp whine, his claws scraping against the table as he tried, and failed, to stand. His message was clear. "Hurry." Harris was already moving, his radio crackling to life as he barked orders into it. Sarah scooped Mia into her arms, her mind racing. Max had saved them. Now it was their turn to save someone else. The tires of Harris's unmarked car screamed against asphalt as he took a sharp turn, the siren on his dashboard painting the night in pulses of red and blue. Sarah clung to the passenger seat, one arm braced against the dashboard, the other wrapped tightly around Mia, who sat wedged between her and Max. The dog sprawled across their laps, his bandages stark white under the flashing lights, his breath coming in shallow pants. The vet had protested when they'd rushed out of the clinic, but Max had refused to be left behind, his whines turning to frantic barks when Sarah tried to shut the car door without him. Now, as they sped toward the Wilson house, his nose pressed against the window, his ears twitching at every passing streetlight, Sarah could almost believe he was guiding them. Mia's small hand rested on Max's head, her fingers buried in his fur, her eyes wide but unafraid. "He's scared," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the engine. "The little girl in the blue house. She's hiding under her bed, but the bad man knows where." Harris's grip on the steering wheel tightened, his jaw clenched so hard Sarah could see the muscle jumping. If Cole was already inside the Wilson house, they might be too late. The neighborhood loomed into view, quiet, suburban, the kind of place where nothing bad was supposed to happen. The Wilson house stood at the end of the cul-de-sac, its blue siding pale under the moonlight, the tire swing in the front yard swaying gently in the breeze. Too gently. The front door was ajar. Harris killed the siren and skidded to a stop, his gun already in his hand as he threw the car door open. "Stay here," he ordered. But Sarah was already unbuckling Mia, her own pulse roaring in her ears. Like hell she'd wait. Max struggled to his feet, his legs wobbling, but his gaze was fixed on the house with single-minded intensity. Inside, the house was dark, the only sound the faint creak of floorboards from upstairs. Harris moved like a shadow, his gun raised, his steps silent. Sarah followed, Mia's hand clutched in hers, Max limping at their heels. The stairs groaned under their weight, each step feeling like a betrayal. Then, a whimper. Faint, terrified, coming from the end of the hall, the master bedroom. Harris didn't hesitate. He kicked the door open, his shout of "Police!" echoing off the walls. But the room was empty. The closet door stood open, clothes strewn across the floor. And then Sarah saw it. A small hatch in the ceiling, the pull-down ladder barely visible in the dim light. The attic. A thud sounded from above, followed by a child's muffled sob. Harris was already moving, yanking the ladder down, but Max was faster. Despite his injuries, the dog launched himself up the rungs with a snarl, his claws scrabbling against the wood. A scream tore through the house. Not a child's, a man's. Harris took the stairs 2 at a time, Sarah right behind him, her heart in her throat. The attic was a nightmare of shadows and dust, the single bare bulb swinging from the rafters, casting erratic light over the scene. Darren Cole, his face twisted in rage, dragging a sobbing little girl, Emily Wilson, by the arm toward a makeshift rope ladder dangling out of a broken window, and Max, teeth sunk into Cole's leg, his growl vibrating through the floorboards. Cole roared and kicked, his boot connecting with Max's injured side. The dog yelped but didn't let go, his grip like iron. Harris raised his gun. "Freeze! Let her go!" Cole's eyes darted between Harris and the window, his free hand reaching for something at his belt, a knife glinting in the dim light. Then Mia darted past Sarah, her small voice ringing out, "Stop!" Cole froze, his head snapping toward her, his expression shifting from fury to something eerily like recognition. "You," he breathed, "Carter's little runner." Max's growl deepened, his body trembling with the effort of holding on, his blood dripping onto the floorboards. Cole's grip on Emily loosened just enough. Harris didn't hesitate. He fired. The shot echoed like thunder, Cole stumbling back with a cry, his shoulder blooming red. Emily wrenched free and sprinted to Sarah, her tiny body shaking. Cole snarled, his knife still clutched in his good hand, his gaze locking onto Mia with terrifying focus. "He was right about you," he spat. "Special, worth waiting for." Then he lunged, not at Harris, not at Sarah, but at Mia. Max moved like lightning. He released Cole's leg and threw himself between Mia, determined. Mia stood with him, her small chin lifted. "We have to help," she said, her voice firmer than Sarah had heard it in weeks. Sarah's eyes burned. Her daughter had been silent for so long. Now she was speaking. Not just speaking, but leading. And Sarah knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she couldn't stand in the way of that. Not when other kids were still in danger. She crouched in front of Mia, her hands framing her daughter's face. "If we do this, you stay with me, no matter what. And you listen to Max. If he tells you to run, you run. Understand?" Mia nodded, her eyes too old for her face. Sarah kissed her forehead, then turned to Harris. "We'll need weapons." Harris's grin was all teeth, already in the car. As they moved toward the exit, Max limping but determined, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping into something far bigger than they realized. Cole was dead. Carter was in custody. But the nightmare wasn't over, and if the terrified look in Max's eyes was any indication, the worst was yet to come. The abandoned warehouse loomed against the night sky like a rotting tooth, its broken windows staring blindly into the darkness, the chain-link fence surrounding it sagging under years of neglect. Sarah's hands clenched around the steering wheel as she pulled the car to a stop a block away, the headlights off, the engine ticking softly as it cooled. Harris sat shotgun, his gun already in his lap, his eyes scanning the building for movement. In the back seat, Mia clutched Max's leash, her small face pale but determined in the glow of the dashboard lights. The dog was panting slightly, his bandages stark white against his dark fur, but his ears were pricked forward, his gaze locked on the warehouse like he could see straight through the walls. The address from Cole's pocket had led them here, to this silent, skeletal building that somehow felt wrong even from a distance, like it was breathing, waiting. Harris broke the silence first, his voice barely above a whisper. "No lights, no cars, doesn't mean it's empty." Sarah nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She'd spent the drive here replaying Mia's words in her head. The bad men are talking, and the way Max had reacted, like he'd heard them too. It didn't make sense. None of it did. But the dread coiling in her stomach was real enough. Something was in that warehouse, and they were about to walk right into it. Harris checked his gun, then handed Sarah a smaller pistol, his fingers brushing hers as he passed it over. "Safety's on. Point and shoot if you have to. No hesitation." Sarah swallowed hard but took it, the weight unfamiliar in her hand. She'd never fired a gun before. The thought of doing it now, with Mia just feet away, made her sick. But the alternative, doing nothing, was worse. Max whined suddenly, his nose pressing against the window, his tail stiff. Mia's breath hitched. "They're inside," she whispered. "Lots of them." Harris's jaw tightened. "How many's lots, kid?" Mia's fingers twisted in Max's fur. More than fingers. Sarah and Harris exchanged a glance. More than 10, against the 3 of them. 4, if you counted a wounded dog. Those weren't odds. Those were a death sentence. Harris reached for his radio, then stopped. "If we call for backup, they'll scatter. We'll lose them all." Sarah's pulse hammered in her ears. "So what do we do?" A slow, grim smile spread across Harris's face. "We even the odds." He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small, rectangular device, a flashbang. "Distraction and divide. I go in loud. You and Max find the kids." Sarah's stomach dropped. "Kids? Plural?" Harris's expression darkened. "You really think they'd only have one in there?" The plan was simple. Insane, but simple. Harris would reach the front, drawing attention while Sarah, Mia, and Max slipped in through a side entrance Harris had spotted on the satellite images. A loading dock with a broken latch. Find the children, get them out, then burn the whole place to the ground. Sarah turned to Mia, her hand shaking as she cupped her daughter's face. "Stay close. Hold Max's leash tight. If anything happens, anything, you run. Understand?" Mia nodded, her eyes too bright in the dim light. Max won't let them hurt us. Sarah wished she had that certainty. They moved like shadows through the overgrown lot, the weeds crunching softly underfoot, the warehouse growing larger with every step. Max led the way, his nose to the ground, his body low and silent despite his injuries. The loading dock was just as Harris had said. Rusted metal doors, one slightly ajar, the gap just wide enough for a child or a determined dog to slip through. Sarah crouched, peering inside. Darkness. The faint smell of mildew and something sharper, bleach, wafted out. Max's growl was barely audible, but it made the hair on Sarah's arms stand on end. Something was very, very wrong in there. A shout echoed from the front of the warehouse, Harris's voice, booming and authoritative. "Police! Hands where I can see them!" Then chaos, running footsteps, curses, a gunshot, then another. Sarah didn't hesitate. She yanked the loading door open just enough to slip inside, Mia and Max at her heels. The interior was a maze of stacked crates and rusted machinery, the air thick with dust and the coppery tang of blood. Sarah's stomach turned, but it was the sounds that nearly broke her, soft whimpers, barely audible under the shouts and footsteps from the front. Children. Alive. Max didn't wait. He limped forward, his nose leading him unerringly toward a heavy metal door at the far end of the room, a padlock glinting in the dim light. Sarah followed, her gun raised, her breath coming too fast. The padlock was new, shiny, out of place in this decaying building. Then Mia gasped, her small hand flying to her mouth. "Mommy, look." Sarah followed her gaze to the wall beside the door. Photographs. Dozens of them, pinned haphazardly, some with red X's slashed across the faces. Children, smiling school photos, candid shots taken from afar, and in the center, a picture of Mia, circled in red, not crossed out. Highlighted. Sarah's blood turned to ice. They'd been watching, planning. Even after Carter's arrest, even after Cole's death, they'd still been coming for her daughter. Max's growl snapped her back to the present. The dog was staring at the metal door, his body rigid. The whimpers were louder now, closer. Sarah reached for the padlock, her fingers brushing the cold metal. A hand clamped over her mouth from behind, yanking her backward. A man's voice, hot and rancid in her ear. "Wrong door, sweetheart." Sarah's world narrowed to the bite of the man's fingers digging into her cheeks, the sour stench of his breath. The gun pressed against her ribs. Time slowed. Mia stood frozen a few feet away, her small face white with terror, Max's leash still clutched in her hand. The dog was a coiled spring, his teeth bared, but he didn't attack, not with the gun so close to Sarah. The man tightened his grip, dragging her backward toward a shadowed alcove. "One sound and I put a bullet in your spine," he hissed. Sarah's pulse roared in her ears. She couldn't die here, not with Mia watching. Then movement. A blur of fur and fury as Max lunged, not at the man holding Sarah but at Mia, knocking her sideways just as a second figure emerged from the darkness, a knife glinting where her daughter had stood a heartbeat before. There were two of them. The distraction was enough. Sarah drove her elbow back into her captor's gut, twisting free as he grunted, her pistol swinging up. A gunshot split the air. The man with the knife crumpled, clutching his leg, his scream cut short as Harris stormed into the room, his weapon trained on the second assailant now scrambling for cover. "Sarah, down!" She dropped just as Harris fired again, the shot ringing off metal as their attacker fled deeper into the warehouse. No time to chase him. The metal door, the children. Max was already there, his paws scrabbling at the padlock, his whines urgent. Harris yanked a set of bolt cutters from his belt, snapping the lock with a single squeeze. The door swung open to reveal a nightmare. A makeshift cell, bare mattresses on the floor, 3 huddled figures blinking against the sudden light. Children. Alive but hollow-eyed, their wrists raw from restraints. The youngest, a boy no older than 5, began to sob at the sight of them. Sarah's knees nearly gave out. They'd gotten here in time. Shouts echoed from the front of the warehouse. Backup arriving. Officers pouring in as Harris radioed their position. The man with the knife was cuffed, his partner dragged from his hiding place, their snarls fading into the chaos. But Sarah's attention was on Mia, who had crawled to Max's side, her small hands pressing against the fresh blood matting his fur. He'd torn his stitches protecting her. Again. The dog nuzzled her weakly, his tail thumping once against the floor. It was over. Epilogue. The news called it the largest child trafficking ring bust in state history. 15 arrests, 6 missing children recovered alive. Carter, now facing additional charges, would never see daylight again. And Mia? She stood on the porch of their new home 6 months later, the morning sun warm on her face, watching Max trot through the wildflowers they'd planted together. His fur almost fully grown back, his limp barely noticeable. The scars remained, though, on both of them. Inside, the smell of pancakes filled the kitchen, Harris flipping them with exaggerated flair as Mia's laughter floated through the screen door. He'd become a permanent fixture in their lives, the detective who'd refused to give up, the man who'd fought beside a dog to save a little girl, and countless others. Sarah leaned against the doorframe, her heart full in a way she'd never thought possible after the darkness they'd endured. Max barked suddenly, his nose pointed toward the tree line, his body alert but not tense. Not a threat, just a reminder. The world wasn't all bad. Not as long as there were those willing to stand against the shadows. Mia knelt beside him, her arms around his neck, her whisper carrying on the breeze. "We did good, Max," and they had. Moral lesson: even in the darkest moments, courage comes in many forms, sometimes with 4 paws and a loyal heart. True strength isn't the absence of fear, but the will to act despite it. And no act of love, no matter how small, is ever wasted.